Well, let's start since we got a little bit of a late start. So, today we'll talk about class discussions, and most of us in attendance here probably teach DE or EVE. So, we'll focus primarily on the context of EVE or maybe more DE classes. But of course, if you're teaching a face to face class, there's a whole dynamic there of doing class discussions. And my very first experiences teaching with any kind of discussions, it was always in a face to face class, and it was really trying to facilitate conversations about materials, about the class readings, about different issues that we were trying to address. And it's really, in my mind, sort of where the life of a class is, because you hear students having conversations. And then what I typically would do in a face-to-face class is have students discuss things in small groups of 4 to 5 students, and then have them each assign a presenter. The presenter would present back to the larger class, and so you also have that dynamic of the bigger class in terms of each of the groups presenting back their findings after they've had a period of discussion. And I think actually using face-to-face here initially is a good like metaphor or example, because really I think what I do in the DE discussion is to try to do a similar thing, albeit I don't have, you could do this. You could assign, using the groups tool in Canvas, these groups of 4 to 5. You could have someone, like present back to the bigger discussion board. But I think as we talk about it today, probably what a lot of us do is have the entire class participating in a discussion, and maybe you have a few students discussing the same thread or concept or idea, and then you get almost a parallel of the small groups. But for me, where this all began was teaching face-to-face classes and trying to really get students to understand the material better by having in-depth conversations in their groups. And I think one of the things that I learned over the years doing this in face-to-face classes is, the urge might be to sit at your desk and do some grading, because you think, well, I have 40 minutes of discussion, so I can get some grading done or get my lecture ready for, let's say, if it's a 2-hour class, hour 2. But really what I found I had to do was to walk around the room and, almost like a talk show host, right, where you have to really try to engage them in the conversation and say, okay, what are you guys talking about? Making sure they stay on task, because it's really easy for students in a small group discussion situation to lose track of the task at hand and talk about other things. And so what I would always try to do is walk around and facilitate and guide them. And in fact, that's really what I'll argue for in terms of what I do for my DE conversations and discussions. So a little more background idea, and again, if we want to talk a little more for our face-to-face instructors, if you do much of this in face-to-face versus DE, we can schedule another teaching talk. Looking at I'm an etymology nerd, so I'm always looking at etymology. And so, looking at the noun dialogue from the Greek, obviously you could see it relates to conversation. The prefix dia, and I think of the word diaphora in literary studies, which is sort of like a dialogue between individuals. It's movement across. It's a conversation. It's speaking. Really, it's almost like the meaning of metaphor, because metaphor is linking two disparate or different entities. What you often do, I think, in dialogue or conversation is link together opposing ideas, and it's actually something that I was just lecturing about in my cultural anthropology class, talking about how we have some challenges in today's day and age because of social media, because of talk radio. There isn't a lot of focus on dialogue. It's on shouting and rhetoric and screaming. And so this is actually, I think, part of the challenge that we face when we look at the meaning, the etymology of dialogue, is it's often very hard to bridge differing opinions. Whenever I teach, maybe like Justin, teaching religion, if I'm teaching my magic and witchcraft class, when we get to one of those hot topics about something really embedded in religion, particularly organized or institutionalized religion, students get really upset. Or it could be something about consumer culture. I think I was mentioning a few teaching talks ago, I once had 2 students arguing about Papa John's pizza, and it was the strangest thing, but I discovered that literally anything that comes into at least an anthropology or a sociology class, because the topics are so broad, you often are surprised at what kinds of conversations develop and how students do disagree, or when they disagree, or how they disagree. So for me, it's a constant check as well, thinking about trying to preserve this meaning of dialogue, really bridging gaps of understanding of ideologies between students in a class. And I always tell them that I don't care what your ideologies are, as long as you're not committing, hate speech or advocating for violence. I am not going to say that you have to advocate a left or right or a center position. It's not my place to say. But how you discuss something in class is important. And thus, I think there's a lot of undergirding we have to do when we set up a discussion, a class conversation, whether it's face-to-face or DE. And let me just mention this top part, and then if you have any questions or thoughts on that. So I thought, the guiding ideas for class discussions, whether they're face-to-face or distance, would be, again, the free exchange of ideas. I know it's something that Dr. J.D. Dirk talks about a lot with his idea of, I forget the name for it, it's kind of a mediated form of dialogue, and I know he's doing something related to this in our Promise classes this quarter. So that idea of the free exchange of ideas, I think, is what makes higher education powerful. Again, not what political perspective a student has, but how they come to the conversation using evidence, sources, academic insights, and not just kind of talk radio or social media insights. The idea of the expressive connection of students to class content, again, that's what excited me about teaching initially is, wow, students are really excited about this reading or this bit of content we're considering for the week, and hearing them talk about it, it actually, changes my opinion or my views of things, because I'm like, oh, I never saw it that way. I never thought of it that way. And that actually happens to me all the time, including this last week with a class that I was having some challenges with, but the students that have kept on track, which is kind of the third point here, have been doing great, and their discussions have been really good and reflexive and insightful. And so the third point is just, the authentic guidance of the instructor. I think it's important really to engage our students in discussions and to not just give false praise or to just to try to really keep them on track, but also to say, it's important that you guys authentically create your own conversations and connect with the material, because I don't want you just to parrot back to me what you think I want to hear. I've seen that happen in classes before, where I've seen instructors like leading a conversation about reading, and they'll ask the class kind of in a large group discussion, not in smaller groups that I was talking about in my face-to-face. And they'll say something like, what do you think the meaning of this text is? And they'll go around and the student will say something and they'll say, oh, okay, that's interesting. What about somebody else? And by the time the instructor gets to the sixth person, they sort of say, yes, exactly. That's it. That's the meaning. And when I've seen this happen in a classroom personally, I think it's a little unfortunate, because that doesn't seem authentic to me, because I think any text you read, right, whether it's a religious text or, a primary source or even a blog post, when you track the meaning of something, there's a lot of differences of opinion about what a text means. And so I think authentic feedback and praise and guidance is important, and not just asking our students to parrot back our opinions or what we think a particular text means. I never liked that in my education, and I'm sure my students don't like that. So lastly, I think is talking about positive feedback and praise. And in a second, we'll get into DE discussions, and I've actually blurred out, for the sake of my post-production videos, all the names, and we'll talk about maybe some ideas about what this looks like. But let me throw it back to you, Solange and Justin. When you think about discussions, whether it's face-to-face or DE, do you have some of these? Do you have similar thoughts? I mean, do you think it's challenging to try to get students to have authentic and meaningful conversations? Because my theory is that social media and some of the media with talk radio is making this harder, because I think we're encouraged, at least in our society, to have a strong opinion, but not maybe have an opinion that is open to conversation or open to being rejected and revised by kind of other people's interpretations or other people's evidence. So I just wondered if you had those thoughts as you're encountering your conversations and your discussions. Go ahead, Solange.
I feel that the initial discussion is most students are very gun shy. They are not open to being authentic at the beginning. It takes a while to give them the environment of trust to be able to share. So it is not something that happens from day one. It does take time.
So trust is I think a really good word to remember there, is like, what will be the encouragement that we can give them to make sure that they feel trust in a classroom setting. I've had some students this week in my cultural class give very talk about very difficult things about their lives, experiencing discrimination or challenges. And I'm always like surprised when someone feels open. And I always say, share as much as you want. You should feel like it's a safe space. But when someone does that, I think it's really powerful, because then it sends a message to the other students in the class that, like, look, this student is really taking this class so serious that he or she is really expressing personal issues that they're dealing with, and they're open and they feel like they can, express these to the class. So I'm always amazed when I hear or read those kinds of discussion posts in my classes.
Yeah, I think on that note, I think this is important for when we're giving feedback in the discussion. So, like Scott was saying, it's a dialogue. Mm-hmm. It's not much of a discussion if the instructor is not, replying to the discussion comments there. So mm-hmm. I think, one factor before I get to that, I was going to say one thing is I did sort of an icebreaker exercise modeled off of what Scott does, is having the students all introduce themselves in a discussion post. Mm-hmm. And so that will already help break the ice with them getting used to kind of like posting. So they're already talking about themselves and opening up a bit, which I think really facilitates the future discussions. But secondly, I was going to say is the feedback and the comments that we give as instructors. So I want to constantly give sort of mm-hmm. positive feedback, encouraging feedback. I'll point out these instances that Scott was talking about where they've maybe perceived the text in a way I hadn't thought of before, or a really interesting way. Sometimes they go above and beyond, and some of my discussion questions will ask them to think of modern applications, but sometimes they'll do it on their own. So I really will highlight that, like, oh, that's great that you're doing this, or they'll look up an additional source or something. So I really encourage them there. But at the same time, sometimes I'll give a bit of correction, although I mostly do this with the private feedback when I'm grading mm-hmm. work. But in some instances where I think that it will help the entire class to avoid maybe making a similar mistake, mm-hmm. I'll sometimes give feedback. But I want to do it in such a way that doesn't discourage the student from their future posts. And so I try to do it in a very sort of soft and genuine and way where and I'll kind of explain the reasoning behind it to help students understand. So I had a student, for example, that their post mostly consisted of direct quotations just strung mm-hmm. together with there were floating quotations, so no introduction or anything. And so I just kind of replied. And first I gave a bunch of positives about the post, like, oh, this is great that you pointed this out and did this and did that. And then I kind of added in, for your future posts, just be sure to express more of your own words and thoughts. We want to hear what you have to say and what you think.
Right.
And so you want to avoid consuming a lot of your word count with things like direct quotations. You should mm-hmm. do these sparingly, and maybe 1 or 2 per post would be ideal. And the student responded to that and said, basically, the whole class could see this and said, oh, thank you for this correction. I noticed I was probably doing that. And so it was successful. And so I think we have to be very tactful in the way we give both positive and also feedback for improvement.
That's really good. Yeah, go ahead, Solange.
Dr. Justin, are your classes DE or Zoom or face-to-face?
DE. So I'm just doing one right now since I'm a new adjunct. I just have one to start off with. Hopefully he'll get more next term, but it's just one and it's DE. So right. Yeah, it's kind of usually the online classes I've taught before have been hybrid or EVE, where I did had a few of those that were EVE where I did live Zoom lectures.
Right.
So this is the first one where I'm doing it like fully online. So there's a bit of a learning curve for me here as well.
Yeah. And a learning curve for me too. I'm also DE only. So I agree with you. And so, and I think that feedback in the discussion page is crucial. Yeah. I make sure that I reply to every single student.
Thank you. I'm so glad. I said at the bottom here, it's kind of, maybe some might look at this and go, what? But I said, if a discussion board doesn't include comments and feedback, it's not a discussion board. It's just interesting. I've evaluated classes in the past and just not seeing any instructor insights. It's like, imagine, again, parallel that with a face-to-face. So I go into my face-to-face class and I say, just get in your groups and discuss. And then that's it, and they just have a conversation. Well, that's maybe meaningful for them, but then why not just, divvy up my salary to the students themselves because they're doing the work for me? I just feel like, again, a discussion is facilitation. Now, if you do pure lecture, and I had a ton of those classes in college, and some of them I loved, there were no discussions or conversations. That's a different story. But I know in community college, at least, we encourage, and even when I was teaching at university, we did a ton of, at least in sociology and criminology, a ton of conversation, because we would get to something like the death penalty in one of our criminology classes. And I mean, you talk about something that is going to elicit not just emotions and engagement of the students, but also really critical insights about constitutional law or policing or whatever. So I feel like, yeah, if we're not doing our job, if we're not engaging at all times, then the students are missing out and we're missing out. And I was going to mention that what I do in my classes, I'll make this a little larger. I was trying to think about this because I've been revising the whole just the whole way that I'm doing this class. It's literally everything from how I give feedback to my videos to my readings. Everything has been radically changed. Nothing is literally the same in this cultural class this quarter. And I needed to do it because it was getting stale. I don't think it was as good as it used to be. So I revised my whole approach to discussions. And what I discovered recently is I give it seems to be two types of discussion comments. So this was a student here who was talking about a transgender student, I think in this one, as a non-binary feminine presenting person. So again, this student was really opening up and sharing with the class. And I was just super impressed with what they were doing. And I said, oh, well, I'm reminded of this controversy. This is actually someone I follow on the singer on Twitter. And this Twitter just won... the singer just won, I think it was a Grammy. Is that the big, was that the big recent awards, Solange? Yeah, you would know since you're in the industry. And so the concern was that and it's a great musical, it's based on Alanis Morissette's, classic album, Jagged Little Pill. And the original character, Joe, was non-binary, and then they switched. And so there was all this, kind of pushback and feedback about this. And so this is an example of where I'm trying to respond to the student and then also connect it to like a current example in the news. So that's one type of feedback I give. The second type, let me just try to find the example here, is more, I think it's at the end, somewhere here. Let me find it. Oh, it's this. Yeah. So what I try to do sometimes is have actually preset. I actually have a list in a Word document, and this is not really trying to do shortcuts, but sometimes I have key things I want students to know. So I'm trying, in this case, with my discussion post, to parallel being an anthropologist and doing field work and traveling and some of the insights you get. And so what I often will do is have a Word document, and then if there are certain insights that I want the students to get when we're talking about key topics, I'll actually include this on the Word document, mainly so I don't forget, and then I will post something like this. So this is more like a guidance feedback post that I'm doing, and more focused on something I really want to make sure that they understand in discussing the topic for the week. So I think for myself at least, I do two main types of posts. One is more the conversational one, where it's really specific to the student. I'll probably never talk about that again, but I'm like, oh, well, this came up in the news, and so this kind of connects to what you're talking about. The second type is more that insight that I'm trying to give them to say, when you're discussing culture shock, please focus on these 4 issues, or please focus on this when you're thinking about how travel and anthropology relate. So I think we all have our different approaches, but I find that I have 2 main types of insights or responses that I give. So I don't know if that's, and Solange, you're often teaching hands-on, so I think sometimes it's more like you have to do even more directed guidance because students might be making a mistake with their projects, and therefore you have to intervene in a way that's maybe different than how Justin and I are approaching things. Would you say that's true?
In a DE class, since there is no Zoom scheduled, I create office hours and I create Zoom meetings with my students randomly, so they have the opportunity to get direct, instant feedback right away and discuss the pros and cons of the direction they're taking, whether it's technical or story. and I make sure that that we are in sync with each other.
Right. That's actually a good, so, think about using office hours for instant feedback or more directed feedback. And for Justin or Solange, anyone, listening to this, if you're interested, you're wondering, like, how do I apply for office hours? There's a process through the instruction office, and they'll actually pay you for office hours to do them with your students. And they typically give priority to new instructors and or new classes that maybe are brand new and need more hands-on attention because the students might struggle in them. So office hours are a great opportunity to do some of this, to really give the one-on-one feedback and have conversations that you can't typically do in a DE class. You can do it a little better in a face-to-face class, although we haven't talked about this, but you do have the dynamic of some students in a face-to-face class who will take the discussion down rabbit holes and you start to lose class time because they're dominating the discussion. That can happen in a DE class, but really not so much, because if someone does a longer post, that's not preventing other students from doing an equally long post. Whereas in a face-to-face class, if one student wants to take up, half an hour of talking about stuff, it can really take away from the class and the ability of other students to participate. So the face-to-face class probably in some ways is more challenging because you can have someone just suck up the time, and before you know it, you've lost half the class because someone has taken the conversation down a rabbit hole. So
what would be the protocol to handle a student that is doing that?
That's a good question. All the years I've been teaching, I've dealt with this a lot. I try to redirect, and I say, like, really great ideas, and let's move on or something. Kind of redirect that student and have a, I don't know, Justin, what have you done for this? Because I found it challenging when I've had a super dominant student taking over a face-to-face discussion.
Yeah, I've done a similar thing where I'll basically make a comment that, these are all really great examples, or maybe some more peripheral topics that we're getting into, but we need to get back to the topic because we're going to run out of time today. So
Yeah.
let's refocus and make sure we can finish off our lesson before we all go today, or something like that. But yeah, so I try to not make them feel bad and try to show the class there's value in, maybe thinking about peripheral things, but at the same time we need to refocus to finish off the topic or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's basically what I've done.
It's tricky. It's really tricky. That can happen in DE, but again, I feel like unless they're being inappropriate or saying something offensive, if someone wants to write a super long post and go down some rabbit holes, if they've fulfilled my assignment requirements, I'm not going to hold that against them. The face-to-face dynamic, though, is different because you have if it's a 2-hour class, a 2-hour time block, and your time is limited. So if I've said, okay, I'm going to use the first 3/4 of the class, or I don't know, half of the class to have a discussion, but then students take it in a different direction, and that can happen in the small group conversations too, where you say get into the groups of 4 or 5, but then one of those students in the small group dominates. And so that's why I walk around the room and say, well, let's hear from someone else. You've expressed your opinion. So that's always hard to do, though. I don't have any easy solutions for it because it's just it's tricky. It's like on social media where some people are so much more pushy in their opinions than others, and if someone is really shy, it's often hard for that student in a face-to-face class. And a lot of us would say that's why sometimes the DE class is better for some students, particularly if they're introverts. And there, as Solange was talking about with trust, they're afraid to speak up in a large class or even in a group of 4 to 5 in a face-to-face class. So I feel like DE can be really positive for some of those introverted students who want to participate, but they don't feel safe to do so in the face-to-face world. So, yeah.
You have a question going back to something we were talking about earlier. So Solange said, you comment, try to reply to every student's post. And so the method I've been taking is I do it like every other day. I'll go in and I'll try to reply to every student individually. But sometimes if I've already replied to that student, because they have to do 2 posts per week. So if in their second post, a couple of them have commented, then I'll do like a post where I kind of address multiple students or something. But one of the things I've been concerned about is uh, I've had these past couple weeks, have had a few students that didn't submit at all, which is a whole separate issue we talked about last week. But then I have quite a good number that literally wait till the last minute. I can see the timestamp on their post is literally minutes before the deadline. And so, and then by that time the week is over, we're on a new week. And so far I haven't gone back and replied to these students that are posting on the last day of the last minute, for a couple of reasons. One, because I don't want to encourage that. I feel like I want to reward the students that are creating a discussion that I can have a discussion with. And so if you're going to wait till the last minute and post, well then, it's a bit late to expect, everyone to go back and have a discussion with you now. And so I kind of don't want to reward that behavior. That's kind of my main reason, but I'm a bit conflicted because I also feel bad that maybe, I should be trying to reply to every single student. And so these students consistently don't post until the last day, the last minute, I might not ever interact with them really in there. So I kind of want to go back and do it. But yeah, again, we've moved on to the next week already, and it will only reinforce the behavior. So what are your thoughts on that?
Wow.
Both Solange and Scott, what do you?
Yeah.
Wow. Well, I mean, my posts, my discussions are the graded assignments. And that's the difference with my class, is that my discussions are actually the graded assignments. So they have to be addressed each individually, no matter how late they submit it. And I do reply to every single discussion, even though it's late. You might want to include feedback about how submitting your discussion at the last minute does not allow the instructor to give you the feedback you would appreciate. So if you could, in further discussion posts, please post your discussion much sooner so I can give you the feedback you're allowed. Let them know that you can't do what they want you to do. You can't do it if they're submitting at the last minute. Let them know that.
Yeah, that's helpful. Yeah.
And try to catch it right now, right? This is week 3. Try to catch it right now. Say no more last minute. You have to post your discussion much sooner than now.
Yeah. So mine are graded as well. They're all graded. And I give every student very extensive feedback, probably more than I need to, in the speed grader. So that's the private feedback they're getting. So I'm at least giving them all that. But, and I've sent multiple announcements, multiple emails about exactly what you just said about how you need to be posting by midweek so we can have a discussion. So I've tried that, and some students are just not doing it. I even had a couple students meet with me privately, one-to-one over Zoom, just for like office hours. And both of them similarly expressed that, they work jobs, they have other classes. And so they just don't have time. So basically telling me kind of upfront to my face that they're not going to post until Sunday. That's it. Yeah. And so that's difficult. And so, so I've tried that, but I don't know how effective that's going to be. I don't know.
Did you, Dr. Justin, did you do the Monday morning 8:00 deadline like I do?
No, I do Sunday midnight deadline. So
Sunday midnight?
Because the next class, the next week opens up literally the next minute. So the deadline is, Sunday at midnight, and then or 11:59 p.m.
Right.
And then at 12:01 a.m. on Monday morning, it opens up for the whole week. So they have exactly a whole week to do it.
Because I have mine is Monday to Monday at 8 in the morning. That gives them Sunday night to play. And I've had a lot of students submit at 2 or 3 in the morning on Sunday.
Yeah. See, I thought about doing that, but I felt like whatever deadline you choose, you're going to always have students that are waiting. Right. It'd be 3 a.m. and they're going to be waiting to that deadline. So that's why I could have done it that way. That's an equally valid way of doing it. I just picked Sunday night because I had a feeling we were always going to have people to do that. It's like no way around it. That's just human behavior. I don't think we're going to have a solution for.
Well, I agree with what Solange said for the solutions. Now, whether it works, and I was looking here because I recall, and I can't find it, I thought, to that issue, I specifically sent out an announcement saying exactly what your concern was. Like, hey guys, to have discussions, there has to be material there. And I've had some classes in the past where students actually contacted me and said, And I used to do this thing where I said one of your discussions has to be a reply. I stopped that because I feel like if a student is doing it early in the week and they're waiting and waiting, then they're like, well, wait, none of my colleagues are responding. If it's a really small class, I don't want to put this off until the very end because I'm not a procrastinator. So it's really hard. I think a little, some helpful nudges could be good. I think I'm going to try to continue to do that because I do have people waiting till the last minute. I knew of an instructor years ago who tried this, and I don't want to go there because I think it would be just a nightmare trying to track this. But basically, she had a rubric and would give greater points, or more points rather, like if they posted by, let's say your deadline was Friday at 5. If they could get it done by Wednesday or Tuesday, they would get like additional points. But I thought to myself, that's a ton of tracking. How the heck do you even do that in a grade book? You could make a spreadsheet, but then you're tracking points by day and time. And I thought there's no way I will ever go down that, a track of trying to assess by days and times. So it's always a challenge, I think, but hopefully you can just, continue to nudge people and say, hey, by the way, to have a good discussion and conversation, we need to get this going. If your deadline is Saturday, say by Wednesday, I want a good portion of this class having a good conversation on the discussion board.
Yeah. So Scott, so do you go back like for those last minutes posters? Do you go back even though you're kind of like in the next week or moved on? Do you?
No, I'm like you. No, I don't because I think I'm like you. I think I'm a little like I feel not upset, but I feel like they're not really doing. They could still get full credit, but I'm like you. I've moved on in a sense, so I don't necessarily respond to 100%. But the ones who post early in the week, as in my examples here, I really try to say like, and this was I'm trying to remember when. It doesn't have the dates on here, but I try to really reward good behavior. And so if students are active, then I'm particularly, because this is very early on, this is the first, so it says, what's one thing you want to gain from cultural anthropology. So the first student is kicking off the discussion, and I'm like, I really want to reward that student and also continue the discussion. So I love the goals you stated again, maybe bringing in a concept, giving them some praise, and then connecting it to current events, the East Coast flooding, COVID-19, the fires. And then another student will jump on. And really, I feel like if my discussions, let's say, kick off on Monday, they open on Sunday, but most students seem to start working on the Monday for some reason, maybe the start of the work week. Then I notice there's a lot of activity, and then a few more trickle in, but then as Justin's getting at, if one of my classes is due Friday at 5, the other one's Saturday at 5, this one's Friday. And so I get a lot Friday at 4:30, And that's just pretty upsetting to me because, again, it's like that's not really having a conversation. You're just trying to get your points. You're not really engaging. Maybe in the future I'll figure out a way to do it based on points like this one instructor I mentioned, but I just don't know how to do that practically, how to track that in the Canvas gradebook based on the day they post. And then we'd get into an issue of, are we treating some students unfairly if we give them bonus points by Wednesday? Like you mentioned with your students saying, I work. Well, maybe a student has to post on a Thursday and they can't do Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday because they work or they have family commitments. So I really don't want to get into that, but I also want to solve the issue that you're getting at. So,
do you do either of you gentlemen offer penalties or no point, no grade if they're late?
For me, it's a 0.
Yeah, I do a 0 too. Yeah. So I have no makeups, no makeups, no. I'm blanking.
Well, I allow a doctor's note. And in fact, yesterday, first case, a student they were in an accident. They're okay. They gave me a note from Barton. I said, great, no problem. And they got their work in literally like last night. So I was impressed. I felt like, okay, one student had an issue. I verified the note and Okay, no problem. So I had another student who used an excuse about technology, and I said, "Oh, you know my technology policy, so I'm not going to be accepting it." And actually, that same student had done, I looked at their activity monitor. In 2 weeks' time, they spent 9 minutes in my class. 9 minutes, right?
Yeah,
So
I
it's not technology, it's your lack of commitment to my class. 9 minutes in 2 weeks.
there's always a correlation between
There are
requests for
always,
extensions
yeah,
and the amount of time logged in and spent.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. So
Yeah.
that's the reason why I don't do it, because
yeah.
you give an
Well,
inch, they'll take a mile. But yeah, so I don't do it. I was blinking on the other word. Yeah, extensions. I don't do makeups for extensions. Just yeah, zero if it's not on time.
Yeah.
I know, like, there's this could be debated, and but I don't know. I was conflicted, and I was trying to get this course set up within a matter of weeks, and so I went with that rather than trying to figure out what my
Yeah.
policy exactly is going to be on makeups and extensions, and yeah.
well, I do a 20% penalty if it's late. With an excused late, they get a 20% penalty.
Okay, yeah, so that's a good idea. I mean, I might implement that. I think it also depends on the type of class you're teaching too. So
Yeah, that's a big one.
yeah, the format and the subject matter too. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of factors, but because I've done something similar, like a 10% penalty for late work, like each day it goes down by 10%. So I've done that before with other classes.
I've done that in the past too when I was teaching prior to here at a university. What I found, kind of like this instructor I mentioned who would give, Wednesday points versus Thursday, Friday, it was a lot of tracking on my end. And although it's like, okay, well, we're being paid to do this, but we all have limited time. And I feel like if I get into the minutia of trying to track individual lates and how many points or percentages to deduct, and a lot of this you can automate in Canvas, I just choose not to do it. So my recommendation would be to go with a policy that works for you. If you're able to do this, to accept lates and do the point allotments and all that stuff and do the housekeeping, then that's fine. We all have our own approaches. But for me, I think and I was going to mention when we talk about setting up discussions initially, I think there's a lot of that, scaffolding you can do early on. I had just had some examples here, and I think we've covered a lot of these, but just for the sake of the video as well, talking about instructor presence, positive feedback, encouragement, expressing the course content, which kind of gets back to in my cultural class. If there's something I really want them to know about the idea of culture shock, I'll have a preset Word document. And it's not for every topic, but for key topics, just so I don't forget. And then I can incorporate that. I can cut and paste that, but then maybe change the intro or the ending of it or whatever, because I think sometimes we all have our key course content moments we want to focus on. We didn't talk about threading. I'll mention that with the new discussions beta coming up. And then, embedding things like research and the disciplinary direction of what you're teaching, and then some of the preset topics. I know we didn't cover all these, but let me just go through a few of these slides, and we can come back to conversation. So I think one thing I'd recommend is early on, set up a discussions policy where you guide your students. And I have that set up in all my classes. And the truth is, after talking today, I want to change that. And I want to try to engage with them about this issue that Justin brought up about how to have better conversations by starting discussion posts earlier in the week. And so I think I'll need to add that to this, because I just feel like that's a really good point. And but this does frame the conversations. Go ahead. Yeah.
Just on that, because this backfired a little bit for me when I did what Solange said, and I sent out like these announcements and emails about like urging them to really get their posts done early. And this week has been okay so far, but I think it backfired last week when I started getting some posts that were being done on like Monday morning.
Oh.
And the problem is there's like at least 6 to 8 hours worth of reading videos they have to. There's no way that they went through the content, and so the discussions are designed to be. They're designed around the content, like having watched this video, having done this reading, having thought about the stuff, give your answer. And so sorry to interrupt. I really hate to do that when you're in a recording. But
no, it's perfect.
Since we're talking about it, because I'm going to probably edit mine to add this too, but I think it's worth adding also a disclaimer about ensuring that you actually have gone through the content. So, because it could backfire where they just post.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
Not only they're posting too late, they're posting too early. And this happened with like 2 or 3 students last week. And I was like, oh no, I didn't mean that early. So anyway, sorry.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. That's a great point because, you wouldn't think of that. Either they wait till the last minute or they do it too early where literally there's no way they could have taken the time to do all the reading. If you open it Monday at 8 and they posted everything by 9, you would say, well, how did this person even do all the reading in 1 hour and get their discussions done? So it's a tricky thing. It's a moving target, and I'm just thinking now maybe for my next class I'll go back and revise this and try to engage them in that conversation about authentic and meaningful discussions and not shortchanging yourself and your other colleagues in the class. So definitely having discussions policy I think is important. And then this header's probably not detailed enough, but I try to just mention at the top 200 words minimum. Here's a guide on discussion threading, and this gives the points. And then as they start working through the discussions, what I've decided to do is set up preset topics. And currently Canvas doesn't allow you to do this. I'm hoping in the future they will, and I'll show you the beta here in a second what it looks like. But let me show you a week that doesn't have students so I don't have to remove these due to FERPA. So I have a list of discussion items, and I think this is probably too many, but what I try to do is have these items that are a key point in the readings, either the textbook, the supplemental readings, or the media. And then I've gotten into this thing where I've bolded the main topic just for the sake of clarity. What I've discovered is since I've started to do this in such a structured way, I literally in either class, or I take that back, in the cultural class, I haven't had a single student do a reply at the top, which is their own original topic. So I almost feel like my organization is too much. It's maybe too much setup or focus on these key topics, in that the students feel like they can only respond by replying under the topic thread and then engaging with it. So I find it's very tricky because on the one hand, I want students to know, why is subsistence a major focus in anthropology? But then if they have a different angle on chapter 5, I want them to feel comfortable that they could do their own topic. And I mentioned that here, but so far in cultural, at least the 102 class, a single student hasn't done this. So I feel like maybe that is a sign that I need to revise this or make it more clear. Maybe I could have like a preset topic called open topic, and they could all reply under that thread or something. So I don't know. It's I think a tricky thing because sometimes you want to give structure, but then is it too much structure such that you've stifled conversations? And I think this is similar to a face-to-face class where I might give each group in the small group discussions a preset topic, a prompt to focus on. But then is it too structured? Is it eliminating the ability of the students to take the materials in their own unique direction? So I feel like it's always that, a little bit of pressure or insights or context that you're giving to students ahead of time, but not so much that you stifle authentic conversation and considerations of things that maybe I haven't seen that they've seen in doing their readings. So I think that's another issue to think about as we, talk about discussion. So I think I may be doing a little bit too much, and I need to cut back on this a little bit. So this is just showing, again, I've talked earlier about just like the different types of feedback that I give. And, one thing I want to increase in the future, I've showed you most of these, but I want to have more multimedia posts. And I had a student when we were talking about travel, had this really, just a stunning photo. I don't know if this was in Tibet or Bhutan, but just amazing. A student who had a lot of experience in climbing and adventure travel and stuff. And I'm like, wow, what an amazing photo. And I want more of this. I actually need to cover up that here. I'll do this in post-production, but redact that. But I want more of this because I feel like this is another way to make the experience of the discussions more interactive, multimedia. I experimented with audio and video posts in the past and they didn't work. Like I said, if you want to, you could do, using the Canvas Rich content editor, you could do an audio version or you could do a video version. It just didn't work. I don't know why. Students didn't like it and nobody really took advantage of it. So multimedia, I think, is something that I don't do enough of in my discussions. I'd like to use more of that. So I was explaining the new discussions beta, and if you want to try this on your class, I believe you have access to this. You would go to your class settings and you would click on feature previews and click on discussions, announcements, redesign, and you would just enable that to green. And then the difference between this is the following. So the current version of discussions, like in my one class, is this. So a student replies, you reply, it has all the discussions there. In the new redesign, which I think will become, it's beta now, it'll become the permanent version. I'm not sure when, it might be a year out. It's a little different, and I'm not sure if I like it. So I actually enabled it in my second class to try to see if one was better than the other. What it does is it hides, as you can see here, you don't see the reply when it happens. Instead, you have to click on it. So you'll see the discussion, the student will click on it, and this window opens up. And it actually says thread, which this was always an issue with a lot of us. We didn't like the threading. Another redaction here, I didn't make the student's name, but I think they're doing this because they're responding to that concern. But what's a little confusing is when you hit reply, the window opens up, you type there, and then it just has it appearing in this window, at least in the current version of the beta. So the problem with this is what I had to do was send a message via announcements to my second class, and I said, hey guys, don't forget that the replies are hidden. Just click on them because I really want you to read the replies. So I'm not sure if I like the new beta that they're working on, because I think the old version kind of forces you to see the discussions. And I just think the new version, you lose out on some of that, conversation that happens. So
what they say, water takes the path of least resistance.
yeah, another click.
It's another click. And
yeah.
That's not good.
I know.
That's not good at all.
I agree. Totally agree.
It's got, it's easy to be lazy, and you have to be forced to click on a reply as opposed to just seeing it. That's not good.
I agree. So I don't know. Now, unfortunately, once it becomes the permanent, when it's in beta, they test it and they revise it. And this could actually change, but I think they were trying to address the concerns about threading. It doesn't happen to me anymore, but some of you who have attended these, you probably remember I'm always complaining about discussion threading. So what I've done is I've created this handout, and probably the handout is another click, but anyway, you click on this and then it kind of talks about how to thread your discussions, and then I even have a handout here that guides the student, because what I discovered for the longest time is students could not figure out that if it was a reply to the same topic, you reply under that topic there versus brand new topic reply at the top. The weirdest thing, though, is this quarter, no one's messed up. Literally, when I was teaching the same class 2 years ago, the first 2 weeks, all I was saying was, someone already discussed kinship and descent, but you started a new topic, and now we have kinship and descent being discussed in two separate areas. So now there's none of that happening, and I think the reason is because the students are really following my preset topics. But I think the downside of that is it's cutting out some of that spontaneity, because no one, at least in the one class, is doing their own topics by replying at the top. So I've never loved the Canvas discussion board, because I think it does get confusing when you're trying to organize same discussion topics together, because I just don't like having the same thing being discussed in 3 different places on my discussion board, because then it's not a good discussion. It's like separate conversations going on. So that's, I think, another thing to think about with the beta, is whether that's going to help or maybe even hinder some of the things we've been talking about with our discussions today. So I don't know. But once it becomes permanent, we don't have a choice. Like anything on Canvas, we can give our feedback, but it doesn't mean that our feedback among tens of thousands of Canvas users necessarily are going to get through and cause them to maybe change some of the approaches there. So I think we covered all this at some level. I just, maybe other thoughts or comments about discussions that we haven't covered today, or anything about the Canvas discussions beta, or giving feedback in our discussions, how you approach it. other things we haven't talked about?
If I can just chime in. So I've followed your, instructions about threading and all that, and so far, yeah, equally successful. Nobody's maybe one person I think messed up first week, but no big deal. But I did have a student that created their own topic. Now
Oh.
I saw that you have quite a number of topics that you have. I normally do like 6 to 8, and
Hmm.
I'll usually have you know out of those like 1 or 2 or 3 that nobody even responds to. They all kind of
Oh
like
yeah. Yeah.
focus the thing. But I had one student create a topic, and it was a great topic. It was pertinent. They did it correctly. They threaded it correctly by replying to my top instructions. And then I had 1 or 2 more students actually contribute to that discussion because they liked that topic. But one of the things that occurred to me, and this, fortunately the student did okay, is that I try to arrange my discussion questions as my discussion topics as open-ended questions because
Mhm.
I don't want them to be entirely descriptive and just reiterating information that we already read in the textbook and that we know. I want them to engage more in critical thinking and
Right.
application. So I try to design my questions like that. But one thing that occurred to me was when in my instructions about how you can create your own topic, I I think it's worth adding for the next course I teach that if you are going to create your own topic, to make sure that it is an open-ended sort of topic. Fortunately, the student did great. They said, well, the first part they said describe iconoclasm was their topic,
Hmm.
and then I thought, oh no, they're just going to be entirely descriptive. But then the second thing said, and discuss a modern application of this, and that was perfect because
Hmm.
then
Hmm.
they talked about even recent political events with wanting to take down statues and so on. So it was
Hmm.
like the perfect discussion topic. But it kind of worried me that oh no, I wouldn't want students to create an easy discussion topic for themselves where they can just
Yeah. Yeah.
kind of you
Right.
know yeah just like summarize and be descriptive and then okay give me my points.
Yeah.
So that occurred to me. So I don't know your thoughts on that, but that might be worth adding into our instructions something about
Yeah.
if you're going to do this, here are some additional guidelines of
Yeah.
creating
Yeah.
your
Yeah. No, that I think it's a great idea. It's almost like how much, again, I think probably I have too many preset topics and I think I'm stifling some of that spontaneity that you're getting at. What I've done is in the cultural class, which is a more typical intro GE class, I give them a lot of guidance. In the second class, the special topics, the sound and music class, I've done very little of that. And I sort of told them, like, this is a seminar. It's somewhat experimental. I'm doing a lot of stuff. Like I did some optional Zooms and I'm doing a lot of stuff demonstrating sound and audio here in my studio. But they're challenged by it. And in retrospect, and it's week 3, I can't change it now. But I lost a couple students and I feel like they weren't prepared for it being so open ended. And I still do the undergirding that I do in all my classes, the videos, the navigation. But when it got to the discussions, I said, okay, we're going to work on this as a seminar, as more of like a not graduate level seminar, but third or fourth year undergraduate seminar where it's like you engage, you control some of the not the curriculum per se, but the conversations and maybe even guide some of the readings and topics. And I don't think some of them were quite ready for that. And maybe it's a matter of style. I just kind of in my head had it as this is a more advanced class, whereas the cultural is intro, first time students who are just taking anthro, no background. So I will do a lot more of that undergirding and preset topics. So it's always an adjustment. So I think if I go back and do this music and audio class a second time, I will go back to more of my cultural structure and say preset topics. And so now as I'm doing video lectures, because my Zooms were not successful, I was getting like in both classes 2 or 3 students attending the optional Zooms. I'm doing lectures now in video and I'm trying to in that second class that's more free spirited and open, give a little more guidance because I'm worried they have projects, they have these capstone projects, and I'm worried like, will they be able to handle the projects? Will they be able to understand that the projects are involved and require a lot of independent work on their part as students? So, it's always like a moving target, I feel like. Either you do too much or too little giving them guidance and you feel like you're either stifling the spontaneity that might happen in a conversation, or it's so free formed and open, just like with the student taking a face-to-face class down rabbit hole conversations. if it's too open and free, then you might encourage the opposite. It's like this fine line of trying to figure out too much and not enough in terms of your guidance with the conversations.
Yeah, and also something you mentioned earlier about which I've been trying to avoid it in the creation of my discussion question is something where one could pull from various or numerous examples, because I'm trying to avoid what you mentioned about like you get to the sixth student and they're like, yeah, what they said. And so
Right. Yeah.
because they can read each other's posts. And so I'm always worried about like, and I am starting to kind of see this. Usually the last post will just like reword basically some of the points that other previous students made. Like, well, now you might get full points because they were able to pick up on all the things that the students did right and all the points, but they didn't have to do the reading or watch anything to get that information. Right. And so it was I'm constantly worried about that. And I think that part of that has to do with, like I'm saying, maybe how we design the questions or the topics. So because if there's only 3 examples that the textbook covers, or and you ask for those 3, then everybody's going to just repeat them. So I'm trying to think of topics where it's like, or like I mentioned, maybe modern application of something, where that way it could encourage different answers.
Yeah, totally. I've done, because of that reason, for their 3 written assignments, which, like Solange, I'm doing this quarter as a discussion. And I have the setting here, I've never done it before, where you can only post by, you can't see others' replies until after you submit, because I didn't want them to copy. So for their 3 papers, even though they're papers and I'm grading them on grammar and minimum number of words and discussion of, the topic that I've assigned to them.
Discussions, they're one and the same, because I'm in a project class. I'm in a digital media arts class where we actually have projects going on all quarter. So my assignment is posted. My assignments are posted and graded in discussions. What I wanted to ask you was, when you are grading in SpeedGrader and you're commenting in SpeedGrader, that's private, right?
Right.
Only that student can see your comments.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's where I'll give, like all the in-depth feedback about what they're like, mostly about stuff they're doing wrong and how they can improve, and also on stuff they did right. So I can encourage. So I have like a little template that I saved. So I kind of go through and I give them their feedback, and I tell them how many points they got on their first post, how many points on their second post, each out of 20.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So I do all that. And so that's like for every student. And then in addition to that, I'll go and I'll reply to comments in the discussion. Right. And those will be more of like, oh, hey, that was an excellent point about this or that, and kind of creating more of the discussion. And then that's where I'll more subtly point out, like, oh, try to avoid doing this, or hey, keep up the good work on this.
Right.
Yeah. So if that makes sense, that's kind of what I do.
Okay, so let's end it there.